Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Mr. Parad Paramahansa Paravajakacharya Ashtottara Shri Srimad Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhakti-Vedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravajakacharya Ashtottara Shri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai. Ananda Koti Vaishnavini Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhakta-vrinda Ki Jai. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to Shri Guru and Gauranga. Narayanam Namaskritya Narang Chaim Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamadiri. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is our very means of conquest, we should offer our respectful obeisances unto Lord Narayan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and to Narayan Rishi, the supermost human being, and to Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and to Srila Vyasadeva, the author, and to Srila Prabhupada, the translator, commentator, and our spiritual master. Can we turn this up a little bit? This is on Gita class level. Nashtaprayasha Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavad-Yuttama Shloke Bhakti Bhavati Naishtaki. By regular attendance in classes on Srimad Bhagavatam and by rendering devotional service to the pure devotee, all that is inauspicious within the heart is destroyed almost to nil, and loving devotion to the Supreme Lord, who is glorified in transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. So we have no verse, so those who have devices, they can fire them up and sit next to someone with a device if you want to chant Hare Krishna, or a book. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On this 10th day of March 2021 in SanDiego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti-Vedanta Swami Prabhupada. We're in Canto 4, the creation of the fourth order, chapter 29, talks between Narada and King Prachinabhari. Text number 61. Shayanam imam utrija shvasantam purusho yata karmatmani ahitam bhunkte tadrushene tarena va shayanamimam utrija shvasantam purusho yata karmatmanyahitam bhunkte tadrushene tarena va shayanamimam utrija shvasantam purusho yata karmatmanyahitam bhunkte tadrushene tarena va shayanamimam utrija shvasantam purusho yata karmatmanyahitam bhunkte tadrushene tarena va yanamimam utrija shonita stene tarena va imam utrija shvasantam purusho yata karmatmanyahitam bhunkte tadrushene tarena va shayanamimam utrija shvasantam purusho yata karmatmanyahitam bhunkte tadrushene tarena va. One more. Shayanamimam utrija shvasantam purusho yata karmatmanyahitam bhunkte tadrushene tarena va. Word by words. Shayanam, lying down on a bed. Imam, this body. Utsrija, after giving up. Shvasantam, breathing. Purushaha, the living entity. Yata, as. Karma, activity. Atmani, in the mind. Ahitam, executed. Bhunkte, enjoys. Tadrushena, by a similar body. Itarena, by a different body. Va, or. Translation. Narada Muni is speaking to King Prachinabhari. The living entity, while dreaming, gives up the actual living body. Through the activities of his mind and intelligence, he acts in another body, either as a god or a dog. After giving up this gross body, the living entity enters either an animal body or a demigod's body on this planet or on another planet. He thus enjoys the results of the actions of his past life. Purport. Although the root of distress and happiness is the mind, intelligence, and ego, a gross body is still required as an instrument for enjoyment. The gross body may change, but the subtle body continues to act. Unless the living entity gets another gross body, he will have to continue in a subtle body or a ghostly body. One becomes a ghost when the subtle body acts without the help of the instrumental gross body. As stated in this verse, Shayanam imamutsrija shvasantam, the gross body may lie on a bed and rest, and even though the machinery of the gross body is working, the living entity may leave, go into a dream, and return to the gross body. When he returns to the body, he forgets his dream. Similarly, when the living entity takes on another gross body, he forgets the present gross body. The conclusion is that the subtle body, mind, intelligence, and ego, creates an atmosphere with desires and ambitions that the living entity enjoys in the subtle body. Actually, the living entity is in the subtle body, even though the gross body apparently changes, and even though he inhabits the gross body on various planets. All the activities performed by the living entity in the subtle body are called illusory because they are not permanent. Liberation means getting out of the clutches of the subtle body. Liberation from the gross body simply involves the transmigration of the soul from one gross body to another. When the mind is educated in Krishna consciousness or higher consciousness in the mode of goodness, one is transferred either to the upper heavenly planets or to the spiritual world, the Vaikuntha planets. One therefore has to change his consciousness by cultivating knowledge received from Vedic instructions from the Supreme Personality of Godhead through the disciplic succession. If we train the subtle body in this life by always thinking about Krishna, we will transfer to Krishna Loka after leaving the gross body. This is confirmed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Janma karma cha me divyam evam yo veti tattvataha jakpa deham punar janma naiti mam eti sorjana. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. Excuse me. Bhagavad-Gita 4:9. Thus, the change of the gross body is not very important, but the change of the subtle body is important. The Krishna consciousness movement is educating people to enlighten the subtle body. The perfect example in this regard is Ambarish Maharaj, who always engaged his mind on the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. Savai mana Krishna badada bindayo. Similarly, in this life, we should always fix our mind on the lotus feet of Krishna, who is present in his Archa Vigraha, the incarnation of the deity in the temple. We should also always engage in his worship. If we engage our speech in describing the activities of the Lord and our ears in hearing about his pastimes, and if we follow the regulative principles to keep the mind intact for advancing in Krishna consciousness, we shall certainly be elevated to the spiritual platform. Then, at the time of death, the mind, intelligence, and ego will no longer be materially contaminated. The living entity is present, and the mind, intelligence, and ego are also present. When the mind, intelligence, and ego are purified, all the active senses of the living entity become spiritual. Thus the living entity attains his Satchidananda form. The Supreme Lord is always in his Satchidananda form, but the living entity, although part and parcel of the Lord, becomes materially contaminated when he desires to come to the material world for material enjoyment. The prescription for returning home back to Godhead is given by the Lord himself in the Bhagavad-Gita 9:34. Okay, all together? Manmana bhavamad bhakto madjaji mam namaskuru mame vaishyasi yukvaivam atmanam matparayanaha. Always think of me and become my devotee. Worship me and offer your homage unto me. Being completely absorbed in me, surely you will come to me. Om jnana timarandasya jnanandana shalakaya chakshu unmidatam mena tasmai shri gurave namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and to all members of Sri Parampara. So this is like essential Krishna consciousness. All of this instruction, really very instructive and important to know these verses and this philosophy being described here. So Prabhupada often would use this analogy, example of of dreaming. This is when we dream. We've all experienced dreaming. We enter into a different experience. We may feel like we're at a different age. I remember when I was a kid, I was always, I don't know if anyone else has this experience. You're able to fly. Does anyone dream about flying? And I distinctly remember the dream when I was trying to fly, and I was, I was a little bit off the ground, and finally I couldn't stay off the ground. I was on the ground, and I couldn't dream about flying again. It was some kind of evolution. But I used to really like those dreams. You could fly through the sky and like that, and then come back to earth and wake up, go to school. So, the lesson here is that we're really living in this subtle body. We're living in the mind and intelligence and ego. That's where you live. Anything we experience with the senses is coming through the subtle body. Oftentimes, all kinds of senses are working. You're not experiencing anything, you know what I mean? You're not really conscious of it. Walking down the street, talking to someone on the phone, right? You know, you're so absent-minded you could bump into something. So you're not really, the walking is way in the background. That's going out automatically. But where you really are is in that conversation. So the key to understanding how Krishna consciousness works is that, as Prabhupada mentions here so nicely in the purport, we're trying to cultivate our subtle body, to train our subtle body to always be conscious of Krishna. And the wonderful thing is that Krishna is not a passive in this endeavor. He's anxious to help us. And as he says in the Bhagavad-Gita, Sarvasya chaham mrisanavishto mattas matir jnanam apohanancha, that all of this remembrance and knowledge and forgetfulness is coming from him. He's supplying it according to the desires of the living entity, and as we've developed our subtle body over years, he's supplying what we need. If you're in an animal body, due to sinful activities, then he'll provide intelligence to do what the animal does, isn't it? That's what you'll get. You're not going to get human intelligence. So one of the first lessons that you learn in Krishna consciousness is that human life is very rare and very insignificant, very significant. Prabhupada would love to quote this verse. After many, many births through lower species, you've come up, 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 up. Did I send you that one about the 8,400,000? Asti team Chaturashaiva. I'll try to remember to do it today. It's a similar verse Prabhupada would sometimes quote. So this one is spoken in the 11th canto. I think Krishna speaks in the Bhagavad-Gita. Having attained this human form of life, after many, many other births, coming up, up, up through the species, it's explained in Kapila's teachings. It happens automatically. When you go down, gradually you become more and more purified, and you go through so many births, come back up to human form. So now we're all human beings. Bahusambhavan. Manusham, human being. Artadam, in this form, in this body alone, can really give us the svarta. This word svarta. Arta means something of value, something that's significant. Arta also means meaning. Artayam Brahmasutranam. There's a verse in the Bhagavatam describing that the Bhagavatam gives the meaning, or the bhashya, for the Vedanta Sutras. So, our real value, the problem in our conditioned state is that we're placing interest on things that are ultimately destroying for us. We're thinking we're finding pleasure here, interest here, and so forth, and all of that is keeping us bound in this world. So in this human form, with the right association, we can understand what's really of value, which is self-realization, God-realization, go back to Godhead, and we can achieve it only in the human form. Manusham artadam. It gives that arta. But it's temporary like all other forms. Anityam. So one has to be dhira. One has to be sober-minded and consider what's these points. And then, turnam yateta napadeta. He said the third line said what to do about it. To strive without delay. You notice there's so many pastimes in our writings where someone gets an instruction, or and they don't wait at all. Bilva Mangal Thakur, Krishna's Kaviraj, isn't it? You got this dream, Lord Balaram or Nityananda appeared to him in a dream. As he says, due to the good quality of chastising his brother for not respecting Nityananda, Lord Nityananda. And he told him, go to Vrindavan, you'll find everything there. You'll get, it was already Vaishnav, they were having kirtan all the time, but you'll find your ultimate value there. And so he woke up, didn't delay, boom, he left. Because our whole problem in the material world is delaying, is kind of fooling around with Maya, even though we even may know about, what's valuable. And so this determination to, sally forth and come what may, take chances, which often means leaving the security of your home and hearth and, renouncing. And so, of course, great examples are the Goswamis, Rupa and Sanatan. Once they met Lord Chaitanya, their whole focus was, how can we get out of this entanglement and go to Vrindavan, go to meet Lord Chaitanya wherever he was. And they did. Tremendous amount of, Rupa Goswami had a whole boatload of gold. He had to liquidate and use it, and Sanatan was entangled in the government. It wasn't easy getting free, but they were determined. So that determination to do what Prabhupada describes in this purport, and that is cultivate Krishna consciousness of Krishna, and by the means that have come down. Lord Chaitanya's teachings, Rupa Goswami, he wrote the Bhakti-Rasamrita Sindhu. So much of what we do is based on that. I think recently we heard in one discourse about the 5 most important processes, the 5 that are so key. Chanting Hare Krishna, associating with devotees, studying Srimad Bhagavatam regularly, worshipping the deity, and living in the Dham. Thank you. Yeah, that I mentioned. Thank you, Raj. Yes, living in the Dham. Now, Prabhupada made it very clear, first of all, he's, walking tirtha, he can create tirthas. The great devotees create tirthas where they go. How is this a Dham? We're in the middle of SanDiego. It's a Dham, where Krishna's pastimes are going on, where devotees are simply serving Krishna. The sights, the sounds, the smells, everything relates to Krishna. That makes it a Dham. A shelter where you can come and have your devotion nourished by association with devotees and association with Krishna, through the sound form chiefly, but also through the deities and prasadam and the whole atmosphere. So this is a Dham. So just like here, you live nearby, but you spend time here. You value time. And I don't even live here, but I spend 4 hours a day, at least. And so the idea is that all of these processes cultivate this subtle body that he's talking about. You become conscious of Krishna. And purification takes place. It's all a purification process. Chaito Darpana Marjanam. Lord Chaitanya says the very essential process of Sankirtan, the first benefit is cleansing the mirror of the mind. And by doing that, Bhava Mahadava Agni Nirvapanam. That's the first installment. The extinguishing of the blazing fire of material entanglement and birth and death. In other words, that sense of liberation comes when you really absorb yourselves in Krishna consciousness, chiefly chanting the holy name. And what is that liberation? One of the most obvious means is you become detached from all of these obsessions and entanglements. Your mind is getting purified. You're becoming attracted to Krishna and attached to Krishna and detached from material life. Prabhupada would quote this verse. We've had fairly recently the teachings of the Kumaras to Maharaj Prithu. I distinctly remember proofreading these. These are so enlightening when I read them many, many years ago, 1973. And he's... near the end of his teachings, he says, Yat par pankaja balasha balasa bhaktya karmashayam guditam udgutayanti santa tadvanna riktamatayo yatayopi ruddha sroto ganasthamadhanam bhaja vasudevam. At the end of the verse, there's an imperative. Therefore, you should worship Vasudeva. So he's saying, Prabhupada, there's one lecture where Prabhupada's quoting this verse again and again. I don't know if you remember. Pada Pankaja Palasha. Pada Pankaja means lotus feet. Palasha is the toes, worshipping the toes of the lotus. Vilasa. So the bhaktas, they enjoy the mellow of serving the lotus feet of Krishna. And what's the result? The vilas is spiritual pleasure. Bhakti, through bhakti. Yat pada pankaja palasa vilasa bhaktya karmashayam graditam udgatayanti santa. This word granta, or graditam here in this refers here to knots in the heart. So karmashayam, this word asha comes up again and again in our teaching, our songs and our verses. Aspiration, longing. Karmashayam, material longing for sense gratification, or things you've lost, all of that. These take the form of knots in the heart. They cover, your original consciousness. So all of them, gratitam udgatayanti, they're all untied or cut by experiencing the pleasure of Krishna consciousness. So he's describing the bhakti. There's 2 lines there. Then he says, tadvanna riktamatayo. Riktamatayo means those whose minds are devoid of Krishna consciousness. They're empty. That includes, of course, the gross materialists, but also the personal jnanis, the yogis aspiring for siddhis, They're not focusing on Krishna. They may try to use Krishna consciousness to get to that point, but that's not it. They cannot stop the waves of material desire that eventually overtake them. We have so many examples. I just heard Prabhupada describe Saubhri Muni in one lecture. Recently, every morning I listened. And Saubhri was, a great yogi. He's meditating underwater in the Yamuna for years and years. He's living in the holy place, He's controlling his senses, But then one day, in his meditation, he sees some fish copulating. And that just brings to mind all kinds of memories, whatever. He couldn't control himself, so he gets out of the water. He wants to get married. He finds some king who has many, many daughters, 50 daughters or something. And he says, please give me one of your daughters to marry. Now Prabhupada describes him, he spent so much time in the water. He was already old. I mean, if you spend too much time in the bath, I don't think baths anymore, but you remember when you were a kid, you get wrinkly, so he's under there for years. Now he's all, already old, he's wrinkly, So the king was very diplomatic, he didn't want to anger the yogis, Said, sure, no problem, just any one of my daughters who wants to marry you can marry you. So, Saubhri said, oh, I see, he's being very diplomatic because none of them want to marry me. But by his yoga potency, he turns himself into like Clark Gable or something, very young and handsome. And they all wanted to marry him. Maybe that probably doesn't mean anything, they're too young for that. Who should I don't know. A very attractive, young, handsome man. Okay. So they all wanted to marry him. So now he's got 50 wives, and he has all these kids. And after a while, he says, what have I done, and he gave me nonsense. So I think it was 50 wives. So that's the Rikta Matayo. He didn't have any assets in Krishna Bhakti. He's living in the Yamuna River, but he wasn't practicing Bhakti. That's a good lesson for us also. You can be in the temple, but your mind can be, outside the temple. So the whole point here is that we live in the subtle body, and we should recognize that as what we have to work on. And everything we do with our gross body, and that includes all these senses, specifically the ears and the voice, which is the key, hearing and chanting, should be helping us to cultivate that unbroken remembrance of Krishna, which is a ticket back to Godhead. That's what we're really looking for. I think some of you were in the class I was referring to an editing change I made. Don't worry, it wasn't in Prabhupada's books. It was in the 12th canto, right at the end, where Sutta Goswami is giving his final instruction there. And there's 8 verses, so I dubbed it the Krishna Katastaka. It's all about Krishna Katha. I won't go through the whole thing again. But the last 2 verses sum it up, basically. And he says, how's it go? My mind isn't 100%. I'll blame it on the vaccine. Anyway, the gist is that by fairly nicely following varnashram or practicing meditation, this is all devoid of straight Krishna consciousness, things in the Vedic culture, stuff that helps you go to heaven, The most you can hope for is fame and opulence in all of its varieties, which is temporary. But avismati shidada pada padmayo gunanavana shivananaradibi. That's the last 2 lines. Unbroken. Now this word avasmati, the change came because we had translated it. I think remembrance. Remembrance of Krishna's lotus feet is the result of nicely hearing and chanting the name, form, qualities, and pastimes of Krishna. In other words, there's a distinction there. But if avismati is not just remembrance, it's not forgetting. Vismati means forget. Avismati means not forgetting. This is the word for unbroken remembrance, which is what you get by constant. And then the last verse gives the benefits of that unbroken remembrance. Avismati Krishna padada vandayo chinotya badrani chashang tanoti sattvasya shuddhim padamatma bhaktim jnanam cha vijnana viraga yuktam. So when you get to this point, I understood from that biography of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur that this is one of the verses that he would quote in his lectures. There's a whole section there just on what verses he would quote. So Unbroken remembrance of Krishna's lotus feet gives these benefits. Chinotya Badhani, destroys all abhadras, all unwanted things in the heart. This is always the first benefit. And Shangtanoti. So on one side it's destroying lust, anger, greed, illusion, all these bad memories, all these things that, it's destroying that. And giving Sham. Now Sham is a word that means welfare, good fortune, happiness. It's in the name Shankara, name for Shiva, he who causes good fortune for all. Yeah, Shankara. Purification of one's existence, Sattvasya Shuddhim, Paramatma Bhaktim, the devotional service for the Supreme Soul, Krishna. He's mentioned in the first line. Characterized by knowledge, realized knowledge, jnana vijnana, and vairagya, detachment from all material things. So this is the pure devotion we read about. This is some of the qualities, of pure devotion to Krishna. And that's, when I was thinking of the Upadeshamrita, I won't go into all those, but it's very practical instruction for aspiring bhaktas, of how to deal with other devotees, of how to cultivate hearing and chanting, so, and all these things, where to live, finally, it's 11 verses, very concentrated. But all of this instruction, this abhideya gyan, how to perform devotional service, it's all geared toward this one goal, smartavyam satatam vishnu, vismardamyo najata chit, sarva vidinashedikshu ete eva kinkara. I like to point out that if you look at this verse, I remember when I first read it, it sounds, well, this looks like a little redundancy. Redundancy, because that's something they try to avoid in the Sanskrit. It's very concise. So smartavyaks is always remembering Vishnu or Krishna and never forgetting him. Then the third line illuminates why he gives both of these sides. Sarva vidi nishedaksur ete eva kinkara. All the vidis and the shedas. Now the vidis are the do's, and the nisheda are what you shouldn't do. In any discipline, any dharma, anything you want to try to go from here, you've cultivated knowledge and you have some expertise in some computer aspect. So there's things you study this, take this test, and things you don't do. You don't party all night before the test, you don't do this, you have to, there's do's and don'ts in anything. Any athlete knows that. So similarly, in our development of Krishna consciousness, there's the do's and the don'ts. And those are the first two elements of surrender, right? Anukulena sankalpa pratikulya savarjanam. Accepting everything favorable and rejecting everything unfavorable. That's full surrender. Now we're accepting a good portion of the favorable things and a good portion of the unfavorable giving up. But we're still hanging on to some of the unfavorable and not accepting all of the favorable. So the full surrender is all of them. So what does that result in? Or rather, this full remembrance of Krishna's lotus feet has all of these natural concomitants, you see. And cultivating that, our chanting, our association, is all geared to that, increasing our remembrance of Krishna and helping us to get spiritual strength to give up to those things that we've become habituated to through many, many births, that are holding us back. So seeing Krishna consciousness this way, it all makes complete sense. And you can easily, be introspective. When it talks about dhira, remember the dhira is one has to be sober-minded. This means introspective. Thinking, what I am doing right now, is this helping me become more Krishna conscious, or is it helping me to become like Krishna? Is it covering my Krishna consciousness? And that kind of introspection and observance, when you apply it and you're able to, I don't want to do that, I want to do this, that gives, a quick advancement. And how do you get that? By association. This is why the association with advanced devotees is so important and essential. There's another ashtaka I found in the Bhagavatam. This one I found in the third canto. The Sadhu Sangha ashtaka. Essential. Remember, this is one of the main five, And I would say that it practically comes first. Before you're going to even think about Krishna consciousness, you got to meet a devotee, either directly or through a book, right? Something like that. To just somehow intrigue you, That intrigue is a result of previous life. As was pointed out, so many people, they pass by the book table, they look at it, they see this effulgent personality sitting behind the book table. But it's just like, another far out thing in Balboa Park. Now let's go see the zoo, whatever, But those who have some assets from previous lives says, oh, this is interesting. Yeah, my friend is practicing yoga. Yeah, I did a little yoga. Let me check it out. And as soon as then they're getting association, and they can become purified. That the seed can be planted, the seed of the plant. So this whole, this step back a minute and see what we've come to with this. This is the culmination. These last couple of chapters of the allegory, this extended allegory of Puranjan, right? And so Puranjan, he represents all of us, completely conditioned. Right? Puranjan means the living entity in the body. That's what Puranjan means. Puranjan is the city, Jana is the person. And you remember, he was just going out in the forest, and basically he's grazing, looking for, how can I enjoy, and really he meets his own intelligence in the form of a woman, and he becomes beguiled. He thinks he's seducing her, but she's actually seducing him, and then they get married, and they have so many kids, and he's going on, enjoying. And then time takes over. Everything's personified, the daughter of time, and the disease, And what happened to his dream? We're back to the dream of enjoyment. It's all a castle in the sky, And this is true for everybody in the material world who's simply totally in illusion. It's a big dream that you construct, and you live in that dream. And while you're living in that dream, it seems very real. And speaking of the subtle body, I was, it's such a risky atmosphere, danger at every step, right? So a child is born into a certain family, and due to karma, of course, there's some abuse there. It may not be gross, horrible abuse, but emotional abuse. Children are so delicate; they need so much care and love all the time. And it grows up, and that scar is there in the subtle body. It's almost like brain damage. It can be so bad, and it creates all kinds of physical problems, a lot of stress. You can't relate to people properly. You can't study. All kinds of problems, because of an injury in the subtle body, So, protecting that, what to listen to, how to regulate your life so that you have all your facilities together. You can actually progress each day in progressive remembrance of Krishna, and we've been given so much facility, beginning with the holy name, the chanting of the holy name. I mean, I remember I was just a gross materialist, like many of us. I had not a whit of religion in me. I was raised as a Orthodox communist, literally. I don't get into that. And so how could I ever, take... Krishna, I saw him, working. Later on, I said, wow, I could see he helped me at that point to go this way rather than that way. But I got really sick living in New York, just living in New York in the late 60s, a few blocks from Tompkins Square Park. Devotees are coming down the street. Forget it, I don't want to see them. And so I ate some oysters on the street. They had these guys that would they would fish oysters out of the East River, come and put a little sauce on, and they set up and I got hepatitis, serious hepatitis. I was in the hospital for a month. I have to admit it. I had some, it wasn't serious, but I had some suicidal ideation coming in. Everything's wrecked. Here I am. So I come out of the hospital. My parents, bless them, they took me back in. I'm a young guy, early 20s, and so how am I going to get my health back? So by that time, I'd become in touch with Eastern music, Indian music. I was very attracted to Ravi Shankar and them. They were good. And I knew about yoga. I was. So I said, maybe I'll try this. So I got a yoga book, all Hatha yoga, of course. And I said, well, I need a teacher. So I looked in the yellow pages. Many of you don't even know what the yellow pages are. You remember the yellow pages? That used to be where you looked if you're going to try to find something. So I found a place in New York, and it turned out to be a Amal Bhakta's ashram. He was in, I think I may have his name a little wrong, but I think it's Shiva Prem Swami, something like that. He was a Swami. And I started doing Hatha Yoga. And there wasn't any bhakti involved. It was all bending and stretching, and middle-aged ladies on each side of me. I said, okay, what is this? And after some time, I chanted my first Krishna mantra. Maybe you recognize this mantra. Om abhavitro va sarvavastam gatopiva. Yaksmade pundarikakshan sarvabhyavantara shuchihi. I had no idea what it meant, but he said that we should chant this as much as possible, so I started chanting that. Anyway, that was too east side. I went into the west side. If you know Manhattan, probably know that's where there's more liberal, things going on. So then I got into a yoga society where there was not only bending and stretching, but also some chanting. And you had to pick your own mantra, to chant. And of course, what am I going to pick? Om. Everyone knows Om. I'm meditating on Om, 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 Om. It's very hard to concentrate. Knees hurt, everything. So I needed another mantra. And it turns out that the spiritual master of the leader of this group had a place in South Africa, and was supposedly he was overseeing a center where there was unbroken chanting of Hare Krishna for 25 years, Akhanda Kirtan. Now, middle of the night probably was a recording, but be that as it may, they had commissioned a pamphlet, really a booklet, a small book, glorifying the Hare Krishna mantra. Of all kinds of people who I didn't know who they were, but I thought they knew something. Well, this must be my mantra. This is a great mantra, all these things, So I started chanting that mantra. And of course, then I met, I don't go into the whole story, I met somebody who really wanted to take me to the Hare Krishna temple. I said, okay. And so that was my first visit. So anyway, and by that time I'd become vegetarian and all this, that, So when I read the Krishna book, it was too much detail. When I served the first kirtan, what is all this? It's so loud, and all these guys in orange carrying these big plates. It was Sunday, of things I couldn't eat because I was a raw foodist, Anyway, it was a circuitous route. But I was involved, and the TLC really intrigued me, teaching of Lord Chaitanya, because I was philosophically inclined, And that really got me interested. Anyway, it's a long story. But it was an evolution, And back to the point here is that by association, this sadhu sangasta is important, because Kapila is telling his mother, Prasanga madaram pashamatmana kavayo vadu sahesha sadashukato moksha dwaram apavatam. She complained to him about her senses. She was taking the role of a conditioned soul, that my senses are giving me so much trouble, and you are the axe to cut down my involvement in the forest of Maya, and please enlighten me. She approaches him. So practically the first instruction is that the powerful association, this prefix Prabhupada actually would explain it, prakrishta rupena. It intensifies whatever comes after it. So prasanga is more powerful than just sangha. Prasanga later in this series, satam prasangan mamavirya samvido. Means not just, wandering in and sort of just checking out the scene, but really ardent hearing, submissive all reception. That's prasanga with the great souls, So, but now we have prasanga ajaram pasham with matter. We're completely associated and focused on matter. So this has caused very powerful ropes and knots that tie us to this world. Ajaram pasham. So one who is wise soul knows that strong attachment has to be transferred to the great souls. That's the lesson of this, that's the first thing. And by that association, and then the next way, well, who are the great souls? Some of you may recognize this verse. Titikshava karunika suridak sarvadehinam ajata shattadak shanta sadhavak sadhabhushana. I always think of Prahlad when I encourage this verse. These are the qualities of the great devotees. Now, there's two verses that go together, because the next one describes unmotivated devotional service. This one doesn't. But the result are tolerance, mercy, compassion, the friend of all living entities. Suryaksara, ajata shatrabhak, has no enmity toward anyone, ajata shatrabhak, and shanta, and therefore very peaceful, within. These are the qualities of the sadhus, and based by the Shastra, So it goes on like that, and then it gets to like the key verse of all of them, And that is, okay, now I want to associate with the sadhus. I know where to find them. And here's what good prasanga association gives. Satam prasangan mama virya samvido bhavanto ritkana rasayana katha taddoshanat ashu apavarga vartmani shraddha rati bhaktu anukramishati. So this is like practically the mission statement of the Society for Krishna Consciousness. It's all society. Prabhupada points to that. So by association with these sadhus, satams means the great souls, prasangan, meaningful association, ardent hearing. What are you going to hear? Mama virya samvido. This is Kapila Dev speaking as an incarnation of Krishna. Conversations, talks about me. Mama virya samvido, from the great souls, like Narada's story. That's how he became Narada, right? And serving and taking prasadam, taking their prasadam. Mama virya samvido bhavanti ritkana rasaya nakata. You're going to hear talks about me, which is like a life-giving elixir for the heart and the mind, for the ear. Ritkana rasayana kata. And by practicing this process of just hearing, chiefly, Tadjoshanat ashu, quickly, apavarga vartmani, is the path to liberation. You're going to develop these three things: shraddha, rati, and bhakti. Your faith will increase. The faith is the foundation of everything. That faith is nourished and increased, and attraction for Krishna will develop step by step, and ultimately bhakti, here referring to pure devotion, prema, step by step. So that's what this society is all about. And understanding how the mechanism, we've been studying the mechanism of transmigration, how we're experiencing results of previous lives, and in this life, in the present. So the wonderful thing about Krishna consciousness is that's the first installment. Is like clearing off all of this latent karma that is comes due at a certain time in your life, and you're kind of imprisoned by it. Karmani nirdhati kincha, the Bhakti Bhajam, the Govinda prayers, Brahma Samhita. That from Indra down to the Indra Gopa germ, everyone is bound up by this karma. But devotees who are worshipping Govinda, the primeval Lord, with one point of attention, karmani nirdhati kincha Bhakti Bhajam, is that completely burned. They're like seeds that fructify these karmic reactions, good or bad. They're all burned. In other words, they can't fructify. You're more and more under simply the direct influence of Krishna, and your whole life becomes transformed. You're kind of taking birth out of the chrysalis of your old self. One birth after another, simply working out previous karma. What did Prabhupada call it? It's an memorable phrase, the chained victimization of karma, of working out material karma. You get free from that. So that freedom, is as that's developing, your actual bhakti and your experience of Krishna is developing. So that's what we should focus on. And this is wonderful information for explaining to people, why they're suffering, how they can get free from suffering, the process of karma and reincarnation, which is essential first step to understand spiritual life. It's all here in wonderful verses and purports that Srila Prabhupada has given. Okay, I'm going to read this translation again. Any comments or questions? The living entity, while dreaming, gives up the actual living body. Through the activities of his mind and intelligence, he acts in another body, either as a god or a dog. Similarly, after giving up this gross body, the living entity enters either an animal body or a demigod's body on this planet or on another planet. Thus, he enjoys or suffers the results of the actions of his past life. Anything further?
Thank you for a wonderful lecture.
Oh, please.
There's lots of jewels in this one. Succinct answers, because I had three, or
Okay, I'll try to be succinct. Thank you for
the word in Shankar, which means auspicious, was
Sham.
How you spell that?
S with a line over it. A-M.
Means auspicious.
It means, no, it's a noun. It means auspiciousness. Kara means to do or create. Creating auspiciousness, creating good fortune.
Sam.
His name is original.
Sorry, Krishna.
No wonder why you got that name.
I'll be succinct on this. Shobhara Muni, wonderful pastime, and one of the big lessons is he didn't get the highest result. Instead, he got 50 wives and family because he offended Garuda.
Okay, right. Thanks for reminding me.
That's a big point for us, living in the temple, and yet somehow or other we may spin out.
Yes, thank you very much. That's a big part of it.
This one, if you could elaborate a little bit, because you use the verb, one falls down into the animal species and then becomes purified by coming up. Now, the consciousness, I can see it as being punished, and you're playing out the term of punishment, but I don't see how...
Maybe purifying isn't the right word. What I remember is that there's a progressive awakening of consciousness. In other words, your consciousness is developing. Just like
layers are being taken off from the deepest ignorance.
Purifying maybe is that's not the right word.
The activities in and of themselves are eating, sleeping, mating, defending.
You're not getting punished for any karma. The lion eats the antelope. There's no karma for him. That's his nature. But after my understanding from Kapila teachings is that you gradually come up closer and closer to the human form, of course, ultimately, where you're most awake and you have an opportunity to direct your intelligence. Otherwise, it's just, they call it instinct, but it's really the super soul, telling him, okay, go here, eat this, do this, like that. So but it is a development, from lower species or from, what to speak, fish or plants even, come up.
Thank you. Okay. And the last thing on remember, don't forget, the word was anusmriti?
No, avismriti.
Smriti.
Yeah, smriti is remembrance.
Right.
Vismriti is forgetfulness. Avismriti means no forgetfulness.
And you were using that, you explained that as, it's not just remembering, but it's always remembering.
Yes, constant remembrance. And that was the change I put in the books.
Instead of
remembering.
It was a higher form of remembering.
Yeah, in other words, never forgetting implies you've remembered, but it means you're not forgetting again.
When you were speaking on that point, I was remembering Srila Gaura Govinda Maharaj and Bhakti Vijayapurna Swami, and how they would talk about this manmana bhava manmana, always remembering. That's not possible unless you have love.
Right.
When the love is there, then you cannot help but be totally absorbed, attached, constantly remembering. And the forgetful side of it, don't forget, was the performance. It's the lower side of bhakti, the neophyte stage of you do activities that remind you of Krishna, so you don't just be in Maya. You don't forget.
Thank you for that. Just to quickly, on this verse that was quoted at the end of the purport, famous verse. By the way, we're in chapter 9. Of the Bhagavad-Gita in the evening classes, so those are interested. It's we just read this most confidential knowledge, and we've just started. So we just finished the text 2, which has this long purport. And as I've learned, I could do research if you want more details. This was written separately as an essay at one point. I don't know by Prabhupada, and he goes through systematically there. But I'm sorry, my mind is. Skipped a beat there. I was going to say something, but it's gone now, so maybe I'll come back. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, I have one.
The last verse? Oh, yes, thank you. Yeah, Manmanabhava Madbhakto, that brought it to chapter 9, yeah. So that's a famous verse, of course, repeated in the 18th chapter, almost, And I read somewhere, you'd be interested in this, those are really the esoteric part, that they're progressively easier. Manmana, think of me, always, not so easy. Okay, practice bhakti, become my bhakta, then you'll be able to remember it. And that's even hard, okay, just worship me, come and do some worship. And if that, just bow down, I think Vishnu, I'll look this up. I remember reading it in one of the commentaries, In other words, giving everybody a chance, something like the 12th chapter, okay, at least. Anyway, any other questions, comments? Yeah, go ahead, Ravi. I'm sorry.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. I have this always question or confusion about the heart and the mind, I'm not sure, we say the heart, we say, I hear sometimes the mind has to be purified. Is it the mind which has to be purified or the heart, or what exactly is the roles of each? Can you please?
That's a good question. They're often used, like Chaita, is Chaita Dharpada Marjanam, the mirror of the mind, right? So there's it. But Chaita is also sometimes used to mean the heart. Or sometimes says the mind is located in the heart. We think it's in the brain, but it's actually not. It's in the heart. So when you think of the heart, you think more of desires, isn't it? It's like, what you're attracted to. What you like. The mind has the element of course, of the intelligence, of there's thoughts there and things like that. But the mind is also filled with all desires. So in my understanding, that they're pretty much interchangeable. But it's a question of emphasis, because okay, mind, I can think of this or think of that. I have control of the mind, like that. But the heart, does what it wants to do. That's why they say you fall in love. It's not like you said, okay, let me take AB3, 1, 2, 3, 4. No, it just happens. It's the uncontrolled mind becomes attracted. So there's a lot of overlap. And I think it's a question of emphasis, but I wouldn't worry too much about it. Basically, Krishna says man mana. He uses that word. And of course, there's the word hriddhi, which is heart. So there's two different words. But we're concerned with that subtle part of our existence, which is sometimes said to be the sixth sense. Krishna says in the 15th chapter that the five senses grouped about the mind. And you can also understand how the mind can enjoy, basically without any of the senses. Just like in a dream, the senses are quiet, but you're remembering, you're enjoying like anything. The memories. So the mind is really a sense all of its own. And I always go back to the end of the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita. There's so much important information there. Because there he talks about, okay, here's your real enemy, Arjuna. It's lust. It's very powerful desire, headed by sex desire, but not exclusively. And that's what's covering your knowledge. And that's what's infected your senses and your mind, and which is your real enemy in this world. And so one has to control the lower self by the higher self. And what is that higher self we have? The intelligence. And that's why that brings us back to that verse, kama dinam katina katida. It starts with the word kama. And how many ways have I sought to obey the seductive demands of my wicked desires? They've shown me no mercy, yet on they've gone shamelessly trying to quench lust's unquenchable fires. But now I'm rejecting those hellish desires because my higher intelligence now has awoken. O Krishna, O shelter of fearlessness, please let me serve you with faith that will never be broken. So how does that intelligence get awakened? By association. Association with Krishna through his words, through his great devotees like Srila Prabhupada. And so that one can reject those desires and pray to Krishna, please engage me in your service. It's not that he says, now I'm free. No, he says, now I still have to keep serving. Let me serve you. Let me serve your lotus feet. And so that kind of, then comes the important element of prayer, right? Longing, I'm imprisoned by all my wicked desires and karma, please give me a chance to serve your lotus feet. As Rajanandan was so nicely describing the other day, it all boils down to chanting the holy name with that absolute desire, that deep-seated, heartfelt desire, please engage me in your service. Not superficially, but really, with all of your being, calling out, Trinadapisuna in a hopeless way. Okay, I think we have to end now. All glories to Shri. We got a question. Go ahead.
I think we have Motra Prabhu with us. I think he may have some questions.
All right. Can he say it? Because I have trouble understanding you. Go ahead.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can understand you.
It's a quick comment. I appreciated Rajanandan's comments also about chanting with feeling. And I've in participating with a number of Facebook groups and readings that I do, I found there was a misconception on the part of at least some devotees that Raganuga is something that's going to come at the end of our lives. But I want to encourage and emphasize Prabhupada's and Rupa Goswami's point is we should be impatient. We should be very eager, not impatient, we're patient about the results, but we should be eager and running to the platform of Raganuga, so we're feeling these things in our heart. And then even if you have to take birth again, you won't forget and you will be purified. Prabhupada gave the example of the monkeys, the Sajiyas taking birth as the monkeys in Vrindavan. We have the example of Bharat Maharaj who had to take birth as a deer, but he remembered. So once we attain actual attraction for Krishna, which we will if we chant properly with the right desire, and it shouldn't happen after years and years. If we're doing it properly, we should expect some attraction and some of these things to start happening it's meant to happen. And if it's not happening, we have to really examine our lives and find out what am I doing wrong? Maybe I'm not chanting with the right earnestness or what have you. Anyway, those are my comments. Thank you for your class.
Thank you for that comment. All right, I'll end with a little poem along those lines. A nice prayer by Rupa Goswami, which I try to offer every morning when we greet the deities. Pashupala vadennandanao vadametam maharati heyubam bhavatu punayo bhave bhavatore vapadam bhajeshume. O Radha Krishna, children of the best of cowherd men, the single boon I beg from you again and yet again. In all the countless births my endless sins will make me meet. Let all my love flow toward your luscious, lustrous lotus feet. All glory to Srila Prabhupada. Hari Hari Bol.